to begin by declaring my support for Israel. Israeli policies are constantly debated inside and outside of Israel. I don't need to tell you that. And that is a good thing. That is a good thing. I do not question the existence of Israel. I celebrate it. Zionism is supposed to leave a bad taste in people's mouths, not in mine. I savor the flavor of Zionism. Of all the isms in the Middle East, Zionism is the most powerful glue of a nation state and of a people who were oppressed around the world for centuries, that come together around the concept of humanity, human rights, and respect for the dignity of everyone within the borders of Israel. And if you are in Israel and you try to compromise that, you're going to meet fellow Israelis who will oppose it, and that's a good thing. I don't have to tell this congregation, I'm not a rabbi. We're in a synagogue, so I'm going to refer to you as a synagogue. But I don't have to tell this audience that Israel shares borders with neighbors who are determined to annihilate her. And in exchange, Israel consistently, throughout its history, emphasized the common humanity, not only of fellow Israelis within the nation state of Israel, but also the common humanity of her neighbors. Ladies and gentlemen, Arabs demonize Israel. Israel does not demonize Arabs. The government of Israel is a representative democracy with a free press and an independent judiciary and an executive that abides by the rule of law. Israeli women have a right to go to school, to choose who they want to marry. They're represented in the military and in any government positions. If an Israeli woman wants to be a homemaker, it is her choice. If she doesn't, it is her choice. Israeli law is there to protect her. None of the women living in the societies, neighboring societies of Israel, as women, have that choice. I have to get used to the word or the acronym LGBT. But forgive me for my age, I still use the term gay, gays, homosexuality. Gays in Israel can live and move about freely without harassment, without violence, without the violation of their most basic human rights. By contrast, men and anyone out of that LGBT community who are accused of homosexuality in Israel's neighboring countries, most prominently right now Syria, are taken to the top of tall buildings. They're pushed down to a waiting crowd, and they're stoned. They're stoned by their fellow believers, by their fellow tribesmen, and it's done with glee. Iran hangs gays. Christians and Muslims, religious minorities in Israel, can worship freely. If you are a religious minority living in Israel, your temple, your home, your graveyard, your congregation is protected by law. By contrast, if you are a Jew, if you were a Jew once upon a time, you were successfully cleansed out of your home where you lived for thousands and thousands of years. And today we watch with impunity the cleansing of Christians out of the Middle East, North Africa, and Muslim-majority countries beyond. In Israel, a Jew can decide to be an apostate, leave Judaism, mock the Jewish religion, mock Zionism, mock the state of Israel, join the enemies of the state of Israel. He or she may have to deal with words from their family, their community, but nobody threatens to take their lives in Israel. And if they do, the state of Israel is there to protect the rights of the Jewish apostate. Muslim apostates live in perpetual mortal fear from fellow Muslims. Sometimes it's their own government. Everybody hates the government because governments are bad in that part of the world. But if you are an apostate, trust me, the people you fear the most who might take your life are your own family members, your own community members. And no government can do anything about it. Anti-Semitism, I don't have to tell a congregation like you, anti-Semitism is not new. It's not specially Muslim. It's not specially Arab. In fact, if you really want to be nitty-picky, Arabs and Jews are all Semites. And so in a way, to be more specific, we have to talk about Jew hatred. But I understand the history of the concept of anti-Semitism, and I really want us to keep that going. For centuries, Jews had no place to call home. They didn't have a state of their own. And now they do. I celebrate that. Anti-Semites from all over the world resent this. They resent it. Some of them camouflage this resentment in the criticism of Israeli policies. Others in the language of liberation. It is appalling that only 70 years from the Holocaust, on the streets in Europe, crowds chant, Hamas, Hamas, Jews to the gas. I see someone there yawning, and I think, you yawn and you might think, oh, that's so boring. We've been hearing that for centuries, but it really matters. It's even more appalling that 10,000 soldiers are needed in Paris to protect Jewish schools and Jewish sites. And it's not only in France, it's all across Europe. That is the continent that promised never again, never again, never again. And it's only 70 years. The men and women who were in those camps, who have those tattoos in them from the concentration camps, haven't all passed. And it's happening again. When I watched this film, Crossing the Line Part 2, the new face of anti-Semitism on campus, it was like having a bucket of ice water dumped over my head. Can you imagine your heads? I was aware of Jewish hatred and anti-Semitism. I grew up with it. I used to hate Jews without knowing why, because that's what I was taught to do. I was taught to hate Jews by everyone I trusted. You may have seen the video clip of the former president, the only elected president in my lifetime, I'm 45 years old, of Egypt, Mohammed Morsi. And he says, and he had no idea this would be shown after he was sworn in, we must nurture our children with hatred for the Jews. What he wasn't aware of when he was saying that was it had already happened. There were generations of us, Muslims, across the world, not only in the Middle East, not only in North Africa, but across the Muslim world. I belong to that generation who was nurtured with hatred for the Jews. I blame the Jews for everything. If I failed my exam, it was the Jews' fault. It was your effing fault. If my father and my mother had a row, you were behind it. It was the Jews' fault. If there was an outbreak of an epidemic, a disease, and remember in Africa, we get a lot of those, there was a consensus, the Jews were behind it. If there were floods, an earthquake, some other natural disaster, you know what? You keep looking into the coffee or the tea leaves, and somewhere in there, you found a Jew behind it. My half-sister blamed the Rwandan genocide on the Jews. As time went by, I came to understand the source of my prejudice. Despotic states propagated to populations that they oppressed, that their economic pain and their lack of freedom was caused by the Jews. Unfortunately, our opposition also maintained the same argument. You don't trust the government. You trust the opposition because they're against the government. And the opposition, when it is religious, uses religious arguments to say it's the Jews who are behind your pain. The secular movements were no less truthful. They told us all the same thing. Those who oppressed us and those who wanted to liberate us from the oppressors all told us the Jews were behind our pain. I was invited here tonight to talk to you about my experience in standing up to injustice as a role model to college students when I was young. I think I'm going to disappoint you because I didn't stand up to injustices, plural. I stood up to the injustice against me. I was denied the freedom to move around without a chaperone, the freedom to associate, the freedom to determine my own love life, the freedom to work, even the freedom to read what I wanted to read. And every single time I questioned why I was denied those freedoms that were all given to my brother, I was consistently told, it is God's will, it's the rules of the prophets, it is our culture, it's our tradition, it is just how it is. I found all of those explanations unsatisfactory. When I first heard of the Holocaust at 1994 in the Netherlands, I was only 24 years old. Can you imagine? 1994, being 24 years old and never, ever knowing of humanity's biggest genocide. I just want you to think about that. The majority of humanity, when you live under these despotic states, you get to know what they want you to know. We didn't know it. But not everyone reacts in the same way. I started to question, then why do we hate the Jews? They have suffered more than all of us. And nobody could explain it in a matter that satisfied me. My half-sister, the one whom I mentioned before, who blamed the Rwandan genocide on the Jews, said, and she was 2.5 years younger than me, and she condescended to me and she said, well, AYAAN, the fact that you're talking about the Holocaust just tells you how stupid and naive you are. It is a lie. It's the Jews trying to brainwash you again. The organization today who invited me here asked me, and I saw the film last night, and I have to confess to you, I watched it last week, and then I watched it last night, and then I woke up at 2 a.m., and then I couldn't sleep again. And I don't know what it does to you, but I watched that and I just thought, the more we pretend this is all somewhere far away, the more hopeless and helpless and powerless we feel. This is happening right here. That is what this film confronted me with. It's happening on American campuses, on European campuses, on UK campuses. And it confronted me with, trying to evaluate what is it that I was doing the last 13 or 14 years? What have I achieved if this is what people are doing on campuses? And I wasn't even aware of it. So you might just appreciate why people who make documentaries like this make it, and why at times when they tell us, when they give us this message, why it matters that we listen to it when it's still at a small stage. But the organization, the people who made the film, and the people who asked me to come here tonight said, well, how can we stand up to groups like the BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction Israel? I have a different acronym for it if we want to stand up to it. And I'm too old for hashtags and the like, but I would say they are really all about bully, deceive, and sabotage. Bully, deceive, and sabotage the only free society in the Middle East. Bully, deceive, and sabotage. Deceive us, bully Israel, and sabotage the only society that is free in the Middle East. BDS, and all the other anti-Israel faculty members, and organizations, student leaders, insist that they are standing up for the rights of the Palestinians, that they are standing up for injustice. But here's what you can do, what I can do, what we all can do. We just need to ask the question, who violates the rights of Palestinians more? Who takes Palestinian children, Palestinian women, and Palestinian men, who gathers them in residential areas, and from there fires rockets into their neighbors, knowing that they are provoking a counter-reaction? Which country does that? How evil have you got to be to do that? Bully, deceive, and sabotage the truth, and you will be told the answer to that question is Israel. But it is the Palestinian leaders who sacrifice ordinary Palestinians on the altar of their perceived honor and shame culture. Israel does not like to boast about the number of casualties of the Syrian-Iraqi civil war, not to mention other civil wars, that are treated by Israeli volunteer doctors. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what we need to show on our campuses. We have an impressionable group of young people. They may be Jewish, they may not be Jewish, but at that age, on a campus, if you care about issues like justice and injustice, we really need to show that. How we do it, we'll talk about it. I don't know, but we need to do it. ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Sham, ISIL, is beheading in the name of Islam, enslaving in the name of Islam, burning and destroying. Most of their victims are Muslims. Their victims, women, Muslims, men, Muslims, gay Muslims, and then the minorities who live there for thousands and thousands of years, like the Yazidis. Now, you have to ask yourselves as young people, where, and I watched this last night, and that's one of the reasons I couldn't sleep, because I kept asking myself, where is the Muslim BDS movement against the Islamic State? Saudi Arabia, the citadel of Sunni Islam, routinely beheads people and flogs them, Muslims, because they don't allow anyone else in. Flogs women, is intolerant of other religions. Where on American campuses and in other Western campuses is the BDS movement against Saudi Arabia? Where? How difficult is that? Where is the BDS movement against Saudi Arabia? They're our allies, allegedly. The Iranian regime, whom we are negotiating with, who for decades have promised we are going to wipe Israel off the map, who are developing a bomb. There's a competition between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam on who is going to wipe Israel off the map first. And there is no BDS movement against that on campus. Why? Last year, we saw in Nigeria 267 girls kidnapped and sold into slavery, and the people who did it were boasting about it on video. We did have a hashtag, bring back our girls, but there was no sustained BDS movement against Boko Haram or even the corrupt government of Nigeria. This film, Crossing the Line, documents the evidence that our students on our own campuses in free societies are being misled, that they're being brainwashed. It is not boycott, divest, sanction Israel that should be as successful, that we should be making documentaries about. It should be the bully, deceive, and sabotage movement that we should be making documentaries about. You're going to ask me, but you know, in this teeny tiny community in Brookline, you know, what can we do? And I'm going to say to you, college campuses, especially in the United States of America, we pay tons of money. And in order to get to a credible, you know, any kind of quality university in the United States of America, if your parents can't afford to pay for it, then you have to get a scholarship. And if we do nothing else, then at least what we can do is say, well, let's boycott, divest, and sanction campuses that compromise academic freedom. Thank you.